Tally-ho everybody, I'm here to do an album review. Now, I've just, assuming this video's gone as planned, you've just seen a promo. And that promo was for this album. This is an album by Dredg, and it's called Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. Their previous albums were Leitmotif, El Cielo, Catch Your Arms, The Pariah, The Parrot, The Delusion, okay? This album is not well liked by the Dredg fan base, okay? I'm just going to quickly cover my history with this band just for the context of that. I might put a little timestamp in the description if you want to skip that bit and get straight to the review. I first got into Dredg because somebody on the Marillion fan in the Marillion fan base was talking about The Canyon Behind Her, which is the final track on Dredg's El Cielo. And I was instantly taken by that track, absolutely loved it. I tried to listen to the rest of El Cielo and it didn't catch me, but I continued listening to that one song, The Canyon Behind Her. Eventually I gave El Cielo another go and I've loved it ever since. I will say as now, it is my favourite album by them, and I highly doubt any further albums by them will knock it off its perch. So I'm not coming to this album from a viewpoint of somebody who's never listened to this band before, which I think is quite important when understanding this album. I've also listened to Leitmotif, still trying to get into that one, and Catch Without Arms, which has got some good songs on it, but it's definitely not to the same degree as LCL for me. Some tracks off The Pariah I quite enjoy. I haven't actually got that one yet because I'm waiting for my birthday or something, because the albums aren't that readily available these days, but I have listened to it. I need to delve into that one a bit further. But this one is one that I knew was notorious, okay? I knew that it had a reputation amongst the fan base, and that's what originally intrigued me to getting this album in its physical form, which you see here in front of me. By the way, weird album cover, I'm sure you agree. But, yeah, this has got a really low score in most places you look. The place where I usually go for reviews and seeing how an album stands with other music lovers, I go to Sputnik Music and I look at the reviews. So everything's rated out of 5 stars. And albums typically fall between 3 and 4.5, that's sort of the range. Very rarely does it go above, say, 4.2 onwards. And very rarely does anything fall below 2.5. Usually 3 is low. 3 is where you start to get albums which are less favoured by fans. As soon as you go below 2.5%, then you expect an album to be pretty below par, at least relative to the other band's content. What does this album get on Sputnik Music? 1.8. Really low, really bad. And if you go onto YouTube, where a lot of this music is, and you look at the comments section, you'll find a lot of people really not liking this album. And it's not the sort of comment where they'll say, oh, I wasn't a great fan of this, I don't really like the direction they've gone in. No, a lot of the comments say things like, this is absolutely horrid, I cannot get through this album, it is awful, what were they thinking? There's a lot of that sort of attitude towards this album. And when I first heard it, which was quite a few years ago now, because I'd listened to I'd listened to The Canyon Behind Her, and this was during the time where that was my favourite song. And I'd looked into all these reviews on Sputnik Music and what have you, and I thought, why is this so unfavourable? So I gave the first few tracks a quick spin, and much like other fans, even though I wouldn't consider myself a fan at that time, I was like, this is weird, and I didn't listen anymore. So that was a few years ago, and then a few years later, once I started to get into El Cielo and the other content, I thought I'll give this one a try again. And I was at work, and I just thought, put on Chuckles and Mr Squeezy while I'm doing my work. And I listened through it, and I thought, there's some little bits here that I quite enjoyed. So, yeah, I thought maybe this isn't as bad as people say. So I went and got the physical copy, and I've been playing it a lot for the past probably about 3 weeks now, 3 weeks, and I've just been ingraining myself in it, getting used to it, and I've listened to it enough now that I think I can sit here and give you my full opinions on this album. Is it as bad as people say? So just a few bits of background information. This is, of course, it's Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. It's got 11 tracks. I will do a track by track review. Probably start off and then go into the overviews. And it was produced by Dan the Automator, who's well known for basically hip-hop stuff like Gorillaz and Head Automatica, I believe. The album package, I know it changes because I've seen packages without these images on the on the insides. It looks quite basic. The images in here, so you've got Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. I think Chuckles is the one on the front, the smiley mask, and Mr Squeezy has no mouth, and it's got like a pig's nose. Very, very bizarre, and a lot of people just say even the cover and the name of the album, the title, is really off-putting and not very good. A lot of this imagery comes down to what the band have done. So when they got Dan the Automator on, and before I go too far into this, I will say that there isn't actually that much information out there, but I've looked on YouTube for interviews with the band in 2011. They've talked a bit about this, and what the band say is they brought in Dan the Automator for a very specific reason. So when they were doing The Pariah, they took longer than usual, and that's something that they point out a few times. They took a long time, and they were so insistent on looking at everything from guitar tone, drum tone. They were so insistent on everything being perfect how they liked it, and they took so long on it, which is why the album took so long to come out. So what Dredg said in these interviews is that they didn't want that again. They thought they took too long. They were too focused on getting the sounds exactly as they wanted them. So what they did, they brought in Dan the Automator, who is a famous name in hip-hop circles. And they said to him, we'll work with you, and we'll make the music, for the most part, and then you'll mix it, and you'll put it together, you'll arrange it, you'll produce it. And that's what this is. Now, in those interviews, they explain the title of Chuckles and Mr Squeezy being the collaboration. I don't know which one's which, but Chuckles, I imagine, is Dredg, and Mr Squeezy is probably Dan the Automator, hence the two masks, these two symbols on the inside. It's all about the combining of two worlds, the hip-hop world of Dan the Automator and the rock stylings of Dredg and the experimentation and all that. So I think that's largely an explanation for the title and some of the imagery we're getting here, and also the sound, which we will be getting into, okay?
Speaking of that album, Chuckles and Mr Squeezy, who are these people, or if they are people?
I mean, we didn't think too hard about it. This album was a little more spontaneous, but it's kind of fun to think that since we did it with Dan the Automator, it's kind of like the band and Dan the Automator kind of two different sides.
Okay.
It was a different type of record for us. Everything was different about it, so kind of going with a different title.
It's kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Okay, that's what I had.
Two separate people or ideas creating one idea.
We're a rock band, and his production, his background is not really always in rock. He does rock bands now, but it's a totally different style for us, so we really appreciate that.
In these interviews that I've seen, I'm not sure, you can say that it's probably very accurate because it's coming from the band, but you know what bands are like sometimes. Sometimes they'll they'll say things a certain way and they're trying to hide how things are really done. This is how I imagine bands do it, because I know that if I was in a band and I was very much into the whole concept thing and music being artwork, I wouldn't be fully truthful sometimes with it. Basically because I don't want people knowing the mysteries, because me personally, I like a good mystery and I don't like secrets being told to me because I want to be able to figure it out for myself. Maybe Dredge are like that as well. But I think that comes into play later on in this review when I cover the meaning of this album.
The first Rolling album you all had, if I pronounce this correctly, is it Leitmotiv? Leitmotiv? Okay, I was not close at all. Right? That was a concept album, right? And is this last album a concept album?
No, not really.
Just songs
Yeah, we
put
just
together?
went for it. We just, as Mark said, it was spontaneous.
Yeah, we weren't even
Fastest
sure.
record we recorded.
Yeah, we weren't even sure what we were doing. If we were home from touring off the last record and we had songs sitting around them, because of Dan's interest, that kind of lit a fire under our asses to go for the record. So we didn't initially have a plan to do it. He got involved and got excited about it.
And it was something different, so I don't think they've done like the same record. Mark said, it being more of a collaborative effort, I think it's
It's mentioned in these interviews that Dredge wrote most of this music, hi Tiggles, but Dan the Automator also wrote some of this music. And the one that they explicitly say is definitely his is the third song on the album, which is called The Tent. And one thing I found out today, actually, when I was doing some last bits of research for this album, is that there's a piece of music to a soundtrack, a French soundtrack, I believe, that sounds exactly like The Tent. I'll probably put a link in the description. It's got a French title. Yeah, I believe it's from some soundtrack, something about Alien, the Sausage Planet or something like that. I don't freaking know. But put that music on and you'll instantly say, hey, that's The Tent. It sounds exactly the same. Is that musical plagiarism? I don't know. But apparently Dan the Automator wrote it, so I don't think Dredge probably just didn't know. Maybe Dan the Automator is a music plagiarist. That's not an accusation, by the way. It's probably not true. I'm just rambling. Before we go on to track-by-track review on a superficial sort of level, let's look at the insert and see what we can find. So firstly, on this particular version, if you take out the CD, behind that, you've got two more images. You've got a lantern and what looks like a dagger. I think once we get to the messaging later on, I think these become quite important. They're not just there for the fun of it. But I think those do play a part in some way towards the meaning of this. Now, the band in these interviews say that this is not a concept album. Again, I go back to, it's taken away some of the mystery there. Probably likely, but I think there's still there are themes, there are definitely themes going on in this album, but does that make it a concept album? Don't know. But also on the inside here, there is the story of Chuckles and Mr Squeezy, and I'll just read it for you. It's very tiny font, by the way. Bad luck to you if you're in the thank yous section here, because it's so small that I can't read it. And I haven't got bad eyes. I don't wear glass or anything like that. Maybe I should, I don't know. Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. Chuckles has a lollipop. Mr Squeezy sees him while walking down the street. He asks, "Do you have another lollipop?" Chuckles grins and gives him a lollipop. Mr Squeezy jumps around and does stuff like a four-year-old would do when he gets a lollipop. He sucks it, then. Gulp. He ate it all in one bite. He is confused, but then gets mad at himself. He storms away all mad, while Chuckles is laughing to death. The end. What a strange little story. What a strange little story. But I think, does it play into... I haven't actually looked at... This is the one thing in my research that I've neglected to look at this and see how it fits into what I think the meaning is behind this. while Chuckles is laughing to death. There's a weird way of saying laughing himself to death in the way you'd usually phrase that. Laughing to death. It's weird, this album, for a number of reasons. Because it's very poppy. The music side of it tends to be quite cheerful, quite laid back, quite innocent sounding. The front cover has a smiley face on it. You've got the little story of Chuckles and Mr Squeezy sharing lollipops and laughing. But little does any of that tell you that you get themes in this album such as PTSD, suicide, loneliness, and mass murder. That's what this album is filled with very little exception. So let's go track by track on a more shallow overview of, do I like the sound of it? And then we're going to get into what I believe are the overarching meanings of this album. And believe me, I didn't think there was any at first when I first listened to this. And that's what the band has said, but there is something here. And I can see a pattern, and if I see a pattern, there's a bloody pattern. All right? So the track listings are... Another Tribe is the first track. Make sure that you can you see that, or is there too much glare? Hopefully you can see that. Track 1 is Another Tribe. And we're opened with what is essentially the sound for the rest of the album. It doesn't deceive you straight away. It's very It is, as the album probably intends, a combination of hip-hop sound with your typical dredge, experimental rock sound. They're fused together, and it very much sounds like that. Hey, Tiggles. A little dingly bell on him. Good boy. I really like this track. It sounded weird at first when I first heard it, but this is where I think the immediate change comes into play for this band, and a reason that, a lot of the fans don't really like it that much. The production comes out of left field. It's not a typical rock production. And what you'd normally get with dredge on previous albums is a big crunching rock noise, big loud guitars and heavy hitting drums. And when you see a lot of the comments from people who don't like this album, one of the first things they'll say is, where's the guitars? Where's the drums? There's a lot of comments like that. And that is immediately apparent from this song. Is that a bad thing? If that's what you like, then probably. I don't mind it on the face of it. But Dredge, from the very start and in these interviews, said, we want to try something new. That's what they've done. And no matter your opinion on the album, you've got to admire their ambition. Right, we're too meticulous of this and we take too long to make it. So for this album, we're going to get somebody else, a hip-hop guy, to come in to put his influence on it and to make the process quicker. They wanted to change, they went and changed. Okay? So yeah, even if you don't like this album, you got to admire that they didn't want to become stale and just do the same thing over and over, which is a lot more than you can say than some other bands. Of course, maybe you don't like that, but whatever. But Another Tribe gets you straight into that mood of what the rest of the album is going to be like, essentially. Very catchy chorus as becomes apparent through the rest of the album as well. And there's a nice little breakdown in the middle where it just becomes Gavin Hayes' vocals. I really like that bit. It's probably my favourite bit of the song. No More Deception, Is This Real? Which I think comes heavily into the meaning of this album later on. But yeah, it's a good start. But then my favourite track of the album, second favourite I'd say, is Upon Returning. It's the second track on the album. And this is more like the Dredge we know from previous albums, albeit slightly toned down than probably the average. This is the only track where I'd say there's big, heavy guitars, and the guitar work, by the way, is superb on this. I think, as far as actual technical guitar work, I think this is as good as Dredge have been. There'll probably be a lot of people who disagree with me, but that's fine. You can disagree with that. But it's just what I think. Listen to the guitar. There's a lot of really nice guitar bits in this track. But it's like with the rest of the album, and much to people's displeasure, it's more subtle. Mark Engels is there throughout this album. It's not like the guitars have disappeared. He's just taken the crunch off and he's doing a lot more subtle stuff in there, more atmospheric. I like that. I mean, I listen to stuff that's... Dredge is almost as heavy as it gets to me, so I'm used to subtle guitar stuff, so it doesn't affect me as much. Still, the production is strange. The heavier guitar sounds on this, like in the chorus, when I first listened to it, I thought that sounds really weird, that the production is really weird in it and it's a bit of a turn off. But as I've listened to it more and more, especially with high quality headphones, it's really crisp, really nice. And that's the same throughout. Dan the Automator's done a great job of producing this album, and this song in particular is probably his best production work. Everything just feels nicely stuck together, nothing's overpowering. My last review was an hour before it started by Marillion, and I think it's the complete opposite. There's so much in there, but it's all just sort of gooped together into this mess where you can't really make out things. It's just a literal wall of noise. This one has noise, but it's articulate, and you can pick everything out. You can hear everything individually and at the same time. It's really well done, and that's the best track for it. Probably my second favourite on the album. Song 3 is The Tent, previously mentioned. Pretty much a carbon copy of a soundtrack from France, unfortunately, but I only learnt that today as well. Most of my research was done today, funnily enough. Most of the last 2 weeks were just listening to the album. Today was the whole, let's do a little bit of last research. But The Tent is probably the one that's taken me the longest to get into, and I'm still not all the way there. The chorus is a bit jarring. I'm not a great fan of the chorus. It seems too plodding. The rest of the song, outside of the chorus, is really nice. Again, great production work, really crisp sounding, and quite haunting as well. Especially on the at the end of the chorus, when it comes back into the rest of the song, on the word home. That is the way the sounds work on that particular bit, working back into the rest of the song. That is beautiful. I love that. It's just a shame that the chorus does plod a bit and meanders, but that's one of the lower points of the album, the chorus of that. The rest of that song's pretty good in my opinion. Number 4, Somebody Is Laughing. I really like this track. Again, some great guitar work in there. It's full of guitar work, this one. It's just, yeah, it's more subtle. It's there. And if you listen for it, you will find it in multiple places doing some pretty interesting stuff. It's not in your face guitar, as dredg tends to be. And that's not a bad thing, by the way, as well. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just a change of style. The chorus is a really nice one on this song, and it's just got a nice groove to it. I just really like this song. Number 5 is Down Without a Fight, a very, very strange one. And it's definitely the biggest departure from the usual style. It's very dancey, this one. Truly Dan the Automator's style coming to the fore in Down Without a Fight, and Gavin Hayes' vocals are quite subdued for the most part. They're quite low in his register, almost spoken at times, it seems, which is a weird juxtaposition to the music. Does it work? I believe so. I do like the track, because when I go to work, I've been having this on, and I've got 20 minutes it takes me to get to work, between 20 and 25 minutes depending on traffic. And I don't listen to every song. I pick my favourites, and that one's played pretty much 9 times out of 10, that will be one of the songs that I play. So I do like it, just by the fact that I keep playing it. Surely that's what it means to be a song that you like, the fact that you keep playing it. It's got the least amount of the drummer, Dino. I haven't actually heard his name being said. But he is there in the background, and you can hear what he's doing as the song fades out, which is unfortunate, really, because it'd be nice to have him a bit further in the mix. Marillion have done this as well, where they've got an electronic drum beat, and Ian Mosley plays something over at the same time as this electronic drum beat is going, and I think they've done the same thing. Dredg have done the same thing here with this track. And again, the chorus is really nice vocal melodies in there. I think it works, personally. And I'm not going to say that Dredg are the Deer Hunter. If you know the Deer Hunter, they've done songs like King of Swords, which is a disco track, and it comes out of left field, but it works. Pretty much spot on. Think of what you will about the Deer Hunter. I think most people agree that Casey Crescenzo is, if not a musical genius, he's pretty bloody close. I'm not saying that Dredg are as good at adapting their styles as he is, but they're not bad at it, and I think this song goes to show that they can do it. Then there's The Ornament, track number 6, which is a reworking of the ending to Catch Without Arms. They've had this track floating around for a while now, and it's now back in a fully new, realised form on this one. It's not one that I play that often, but when I do listen to it, it's all right. It never reaches that next level. It's very downtrodden. Yeah, probably one of my least favourites on the album, but I'm not going to say it's a bad song. When I listen to it, I think, yeah, it's quite pleasant, but it never gets played when I'm coming to and from work, so that's an indication of where it falls for me in this album. Track 7 is probably my favourite of the album. And does it say much about my opinion of the album when I say that this song is probably the closest to the other dredge sound from previous albums that we get on this album? The Thought of Losing You sounds a lot like it could have come from probably one of the 2 previous albums. Maybe not Else Yellow, definitely not Leitmotif, but one of the 2 previous albums. This one could probably slot in those 2 albums. And it's my favourite on the track. Why? It's really catchy. It's got a great hook in the chorus. And I think it's really haunting. It really does what it means to do. It does it close enough to perfect, in my opinion. It just works as well as it was intended. It did exactly what it said on the tin, basically. Really catchy song. I'm always playing it in the car. One of my favourite dredge songs, probably. Really like that one. Next is Califat. So we've gone from full-blown dredge sound in The Thought of Losing You to probably the most minimalist dredge track that we've heard, certainly on this album, maybe through their discography, but it's basically just an acoustic guitar. You get a few strings in there later, and Gavin Hayes' vocals, and it sings of a man who... We'll get into the true story behind Califat as we do the album meaning and overview, but it's a nice little song. I don't play it that often. It's a bit too quiet for my taste as I'm going to and from work, so I like something with a bit more power behind it, but it's a nice little ditty. You know, it does its job, and the message is haunting, and I think that's the origin for the knife image that we get in the centre of this album, the imagery, and I think it's one of the main points where the main focus point for the meaning of this album. And if you look into the backstory of Califat, yeah, it's pretty gruesome, but more about that later. Sun Goes Down, which is track 9, probably my 3rd favourite on the album, sort of fighting with Upon Returning for a 2nd favourite. I just love the groove of this one and the sound of it. It's a pop song, but it's very... It's in the uncanny valley of song mood. So you've got really low mood, sad music, and then you've got really happy at the other side, and you've got the uncanny valley where it's happy, but it's not 100% happy. It's just close that it becomes really almost terrifying. It's in that weird spot, and there's a French feel to it as well. I can't think of the instrument that plays throughout a lot of this song, but it's played, not played well, but it's used brilliantly. I just love the feel of it, and it's just got this haunting vibe to it. It doesn't feel like it is there, but it just is. It's weird. A song that seems so basic on the surface, but... And even the lyrics seem a bit basic. But once you delve, it just opens up a new world. And you're like, oh, what's going on under this song? Yeah, it's great. I really like that song. Love it. Number 10 is Where I'll End Up. And this is very similar to Sun Goes Down in terms of feel, where it feels quite nice and bouncy, even bouncier than Sun Goes Down, but it's got this huge lump of sadness just stuck in its throat. And just begging to come out. It's a really sad tune, even though it comes across as a really jovial, happy tune. And it's nice. I think it's got Gavin Hayes' best vocal harmonies that I think he's ever done. He's done a really good job of the vocals on this track. A lot of people don't like it because I think it's too happy and sort of basic. It's very similar to Sun Goes Down in that sort of way, even though those 2 songs are just completely different. They're similar in lots of ways, but completely different in others. Yeah, I think it's a pleasant track. It's not my favourite on the album, probably sort of halfway to lower halfway, but it does its job. I quite like it. And then the last track, which until very recently has always seemed a bit misplaced before it began. Track 11, the final track on the album. Not too long ago I thought this album should have ended with Where I'll End Up. It feels like a final note on the album. It feels like where the album should end, and then suddenly this Western style thing comes in, and you're like, where the bloody hell did this come from? And it never reaches a climax, it just sort of ends, and it feels like, is this a B-side that they've just sort of tacked on as a bonus track? Because that's how it feels. But the more I look into the meaning behind this album, it fits. It fits. Do I like the song? It's a bit of fun. It's sort of down there at the lower rungs of this album in terms of my favourite songs. But I'll listen to it. There's not a single song in here that I'll say I don't really want to listen to that. The only one that comes close is the 10th, and that's only because of the chorus sections. I don't like that chorus. I'm trying to get myself to like it, but I just can't. I can't really. That's the low point of the album. But that's the track-by-track run-through. Let's go over the overview. What connects everything together on this album? Why this model with the mask? There's actually a video on YouTube of the mask being put together, which is quite interesting. But you've also got that video that I started this video with, of this girl wandering through the woods in this really creepy way. What a weird way to introduce an album which, on the surface, seems very playful and jovial and simple, without a care in the world. That's what this album feels like on the surface. There's no meaning behind this, the band will say. There's no concept behind it. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just us and Dan the Automator coming together and saying, let's just put a bunch of songs together. Why this character? What is this? I mean, I'd like to take the band at their word, but I'm the sort of guy that says that Jimmy Eat World's Static Prevails is a concept album. So you ain't getting nothing past me, okay? And to my own fault, you know, I look into things oftentimes too much and try to put things together where perhaps they don't fit. So everything from this point on is basically my interpretation of the meaning of this album. So don't take anything as gospel truth from what I'm saying now, because the band will probably say otherwise, and they're free to, and you're free to say that I don't think that's the case. This is all my interpretation. This is where I've come to after listening to this album for 2 to 3 weeks and doing my research and looking through the lyrics and saying, right, what are the themes here? Why this lady on the front? Why is she there? She has a mask on, a mask with a big sadistic grin. Okay, what can we make of that? There's nothing much else in the album, of course. It's a blank background. She's on her own, funnily enough. Then you've got these two symbols, which I just think those are symbols for Dredg and Dan the Automator. But then you've also got the lantern and the dagger in there as well. And of course, the two masks of Chuckles and Mr Squeezy in front of that. What do I think the messages of this album are? Or what I think the message is? I think this album is all about disguising. And that should seem obvious because the woman on the front has got a mask on. You can't see her face. We never see her face, not in the promos, not anywhere else. This woman has no face as far as we're concerned. She just has this mask on with a big, horrible grin on it. A lot of the themes in this album, I'll basically go through what I believe the themes of the album are, okay? There's a lot of almost military-style stuff. Stories of coming away from the military, most noticeably on Upon Returning. I think it is actually suggested that the song Upon Returning is about somebody coming out of the military back into civilian life, which, obviously, being ex-Navy, I'm quite fond of that. I work with veterans, and a lot of people do come out of the Navy unable to adjust to civilian life. And I mean that literally. They do not know how to adjust back into that new lifestyle. I've seen it firsthand at my place of work. And this song seems to be about that. And I do get that feeling, listen to some of these other songs. For example, Somebody Is Laughing. It gives me that feeling of somebody who's trying to get back into a lifestyle that they're not used to, who has this PTSD. Because a lot of people who come out of the military, especially if they've been in war zones, come out with PTSD. And I get a lot of that feeling through a lot of these songs. So somebody is laughing, has that big message, I think. Call it heaven or the afterlife or a far-viewed hell. It's just here, that's all, that's all. When I put it into the context of somebody come out of the military, that is what I picture. That sort of idea of, you've been to hell, is this now heaven where I am, or is it another hell I've entered? What is this place? That's what a lot of them feel like. And then you've got the tent, which is a strange one. I think that's where the lantern picture comes from inside the book here. It's the idea of you're in this metaphorical tent, and you open up the tent and you've got the light coming out, and you wander out into the woods, and that tent is always your source of light where you're coming back to. You try to use the moonlight as a guide, but you always end up coming back to the tent. That's what I feel that this song is about, and it's a metaphorical song. One of the stories that I found interesting at work recently, there was a guy who came out of the military, and he was coming to my place of work as a veteran. It's essentially a veterans retreat where they come because they're struggling with mental health issues, and he had severe PTSD from being in war zones, okay? So you would naturally think that people with PTSD who've come out of war zones do not want to go back. But of course, the Russia-Ukraine thing just started up recently, and shortly after it started, we got news that he had gotten on a flight and gone to Ukraine to fight in the war. This guy who was suffering from PTSD, having been in war zones, you'd think, why would he go there? But no, he had a job, he had family here, and he just thought, no, I'm going to go fight in Ukraine. It's hard to explain why, but it's probably not an uncommon thing. And when I look at this album and all those themes of coming out of a certain life and going into a new way of life, but being unable to completely separate yourself from that previous life, that's what the tent is to me. The light of the tent. He tries to go around, but he's always dragged back to this tent because from his perspective, he tries to use the moonlight, but he always gets dragged back to that source of light. You also have a problem with veterans, and it's veteran suicide, because they do have a high suicide rate. Okay? And a lot of times you don't see it coming. Sometimes you do, because they suffer heavily from PTSD, but I mean, it's not just the military as well. People who commit sometimes you don't see it. Down Without a Fight. The lyric almost suggests it's something very basic, as there's a city that's under siege and people could have protected it, they could have stayed there and held off and carried on as normal, but instead they just gave up, just dropped tools, and they got killed in this fictitious scenario. And as I'm listening to this song, I'm connecting it back to this thing where some people who come out of the military do just give up. They can't adjust to the point where they just drop tools and very sadly commit suicide. It is a very sad case, and that's what comes to mind when I'm listening to this song. It's in a very fictitious scenario, and it's juxtaposed with this bouncy, almost dance-like tune. But we're going to get into why I think that's the case in a little bit. We're just covering the themes here and how I think it fits into each song. Of course, you've got Another Tribe, which a lot of people have said, oh, it's about Dredg talking about other bands succumbing to certain trends in the music industry. But if you look at those lyrics, you can tie it into this idea of somebody who's coming out of the military and is trying to adjust to another tribe. Maybe he sees all these other people going off and doing these things, and he just sees them as all the same and what have you. Or it could be from another perspective of somebody seeing him go into the military, so he's just following all the trends, becomes obsessed with it, what have you. Again, these are all tentative interpretations, but it's what's sort of been floating in my mind throughout this. Then, of course, there's the thought of being alone. It comes across a few times in this album, the theme of being alone. It's in Somebody Is Laughing, We're On Our Own. It's in the thought of losing you, of course. Losing you means you're without them, you're on your own. The Ornament, I'm here all alone again. The tent in itself, almost, because he's wandering out into the woodlands, it's almost like you're on your own. Upon returning, please know I'll be here when you return. That's the opposite of loneliness. So the fact that it's the opposite of loneliness, it plays with that theme of loneliness. Please know I'll be here when you return, I believe, is the lyric. And that ties in with the idea of the thought of losing you. And further down, where I'll end up. I have to let you go. These connect, these themes of this person maybe coming out of the military and he's struggling to adjust to civilian life, but he's only got like maybe his wife there or something like that. And he feels like this is his only connection now to the real world because he can't adjust to the civilian world. He's out of the military world. His world is now this person, this family member, relative, wife, whatever have you. It's never really specified. But that theme seems to go through this album. So yeah, upon returning, the tent can also be a metaphor for that light being another person. Again, it can be multiple layers, multiple meanings. The ornament, I believe, the thought of losing you is obvious. And then where I'll end up. I think there's a line in the ornament which is, here all alone again, hoping to fill this void within. Again, that goes back to my idea of what veterans tend to feel like when they've come back from war zones. Like, suddenly there's something just pulled out of them. There's something missing. Again, I'm just throwing stuff out there which I think fits in the theme using specific lyrics. And then we get towards the end of the album here. Califat is an incredibly interesting song. Because I thought, okay, the song is talking about some guy who got fired from his job after working there for so long, and then he would resolve it. And the song itself isn't resolved, ironically. So he sings about he's split from his family, he's at wit's end, everything's fucked, and then the last line is something along the lines of he'll resolve it. He will resolve this, and then the song just ends. It's like, okay, this song itself has not been resolved. I thought, what is this all about? What even is Califat? I had no idea what Califat was. So I typed it into Google. And of course, the first thing that turned up were the name of this song. So I thought, okay, is Califat a real word? Is it a real thing? And then I scrolled down a bit more, and the only other case of Califat being on Google that I could find within reasonable reach was a story that came out of California in 2009, 2 years before this album came out. And remember that the band are from California. A guy called Devan Califat, spelled exactly as it is on this album, murdered his entire family, his wife and his kids. And then you think, are you sure it's about that? Well, yeah, firstly, in California, 2 years prior, and the biggest clue is that all of the news articles that talk about this guy say that he worked at Yahoo Incorporated. And in the song, the lyric is he worked something at his high-tech job. His high-tech job sounds very Yahoo Incorporated sort of thing, doesn't it? Yeah, I think all those mean that this isn't a coincidence. I couldn't find anything else about a Califat, whatever it is. So I'm 99% certain it's in reference to this guy that brutally murdered his wife and kids It was quite a large number as well. He had a lot of kids, including really young kids. A really sad story. And it's strange. Again, it's that juxtaposition of you listen to the song, you think, oh, that's a nice little ditty. That's nice. There's a nice little acoustic guitar, nice vocal melody, relatively cheerful, and it ends on, it will be resolved, all good news. And then you look into it and think, Christ, this song is about a mass murderer. And then you think, hold on, the last line is, it's something he'll resolve. In a way, he resolved it. And that's creepy. But that seems to be what it's implying. I remember, if you look at Marillion, when they wrote, or Steve Hogarth wrote Brave, he heard this story in a newspaper of a girl that was wandering the Severn Bridge. And he took that story and he invented a fiction around it. Maybe that's what Dredg, specifically Gavin Hayes, I imagine, have done here. Is they've seen this horrific story and just put a little bit more detail into it, like waited in line with the rest of the mob. There's stuff about he lost his wife and kids and he ended up on his own. But it's sort of written in a way where this happened before the resolving. But if you actually look into the stories of Devan Califat, and this is the weirdest part of it, I don't think they ever found a reason for him doing it. There were speculations. There was nothing about him being fired. He never, from what I've seen in my research, he never got a pink slip, which is why I think they did some artistic stuff and threw in some extra details, much like Marillion did with the album Brave. They threw in a few little extra details, made a little bit of fiction to it. One of the things they speculated was that he had debts with his brother, because I think he was of Indian descent, and he had family back in, was it Pakistan? It was a country in Asia. And he was sending money back there, and they thought maybe he had a dispute with one of his brothers. They thought that, but they also found that he had a brain tumour. He had a brain tumour. It was benign, from what I've read, but and I don't think he had told anyone. So he had been going through life with this brain tumour, and then suddenly he winds up murdering his whole family. It's weird, and it just adds this creepy undertone, not only to this song, but the rest of the album, as I'll cover in a second. And then we get to Before It Began. So we've got these 10 songs that come before, which cover a lot of things like coming out of the military, going from an old life into a new one and not quite being able to take yourself completely away from it. The idea of suicide, mass murder, and having the ones close to you leave you, or you leave them. We've seen all of these things I've just mentioned are either basically explicit in the case of Califat, for example, or implied in multiple songs. It's all there. And then we get Before It Began, which at first, as I've mentioned, just seemed a bit out of place, but with all that context, it made sense to me. It's basically summarised the whole album and turned it into this brief clip of like a western. It's like turned it into this pseudo-fictitious summary song. It was already over before it began. It talks about the king going down the road and he got wounds. He didn't think they would bite, but they still hurt or whatever. And as you look through the lyrics, you think, it does sort of summarise all the themes that are in here. Something about being difficult even for the toughest man, it could be a reference to the military life again. It's a really weird way to just say, those are your 10 songs, here's a nice little summary of everything we've covered in what initially seems a very basic and very weird Western-style ditty. Weird album. Weird. Where does the masked girl come in, you ask me? And I think I know. Because as I've gone over all these themes, there's something that, again, I've heard from where I work, with people who suffer from PTSD, who are suicidal, who are in the worst parts of their life, who have these horrible thoughts going through their head. They mask it with a big smile. And there are people at work who go around and they're very happy, very jovial sorts. And then you'll learn about what they're going through and you think, how is he smiling? How is he the most jolly person on the site? But as soon as you scratch the surface, there is something really not right. Something horrible is happening. And oftentimes creepy. And if you look at the song like Califat, there was no real... From what I've read, there was no reason to think that this guy was going to mass murder his whole family. He disguised it. Military people tend to disguise their PTSD. They try to make it look as if everything's fine. Most people do that to some degree. And I think that's where the masked girl comes from, with the big, creepy, smiley face. The insincere smile. The smile that's too good to be true. Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. Go through life chuckling, but underneath there's something not pleasant. And I think that's where the imagery comes from. It also explains the dagger. I mean, I'm trying to remember the Califat story, but I think he might have stabbed his family. I can't rightly remember. I think he stabbed his family, but when he murdered them all. That's maybe why you've got the dagger in there. It's... The reason this album intrigues me is because everything about it seems so light-hearted and mellow and relaxed, but beneath the surface, it's just crawling with maggots of evil, sadistic things and horrible things and sadness, and it's weird. And that's why I love it. You've got a scratch beneath the surface. It doesn't bear itself to you, much like the lady on the front. You don't see her true face. You've got to find it out for yourself. And because all you see on the front is this girl, funnily enough, on her own. She's on her own in the woods as well. Loneliness is covered a lot in this one, a lot. It's a really sad album, a really sad album. And it's bleak, and it covers some really hard topics, from my interpretation. But on the front, it's got a lovely story about lollipops. And there's a smiley girl on the front. Granted, the smile does not look sincere. I think that's the point. It's supposed to look exaggerated. Too good to be true. Uncanny valley sort of smile. For a reason. That's my reasoning. And then you get, of course, the little story in the middle. He is confused, but then gets mad at himself. He storms away all mad while Chuckles is laughing to death. That's going to need more thinking to me, because again, that phrasing of just laughing to death, it's usually laughing himself to death is the usual way you'd phrase that, and it's just laughing to death. He is confused. The fact that he swallowed the lollipop, gets all mad and storms off. Maybe that's... I'm thinking on the fly here. So we've got the themes of... We've got where I'll end up. So you've got this feeling of he's got this mask on, he's trying to put a brave face on everything, but inside he's distraught. He's going through traumatic stuff. And all the while, he's got this relationship, whether it be a relative or a wife or husband or whatever. And the threat of them leaving. And then where I'll end up is where one of these characters moves on and they split up and they're on their own. And in this story of Chuckles and Mr Squeezy, he's confused and then gets mad at himself and storms away, while Chuckles laughs himself to death. It does seem to fit. And again, I always say this about stuff that I like. I like mystery. I like stuff where you're not fed it on a plate. I like where you've got to dig in beneath the surface and you can interpret things completely wrong. I could be completely wrong. The band in interviews have said I'm wrong. Not me specifically, obviously. They said there's no concept here. But I'm looking at this thinking, it all seems connected to me. It all seems connected and it makes sense to me. And you know what? This album is not as bad as people say. Give it a listen, and maybe just put yourself in my mindset. Even if you don't believe me or think that it's how it is, just maybe take what I said on board and go listen to this album and think to yourself, this album is the mask over something really bleak and awful. Not awful in the sense of, oh, it's bad music, but awful as in mass murder, suicide, loneliness. It's all in here, all under this mask. I love it. Right, I've gone on long enough. What do I think of this album? It's certainly not as bad as people say. Is it their best album? No. I think El Cielo is their best album. This is my second favourite Dredg album. It's up there. I like it. I actually prefer it to Catch Without Arms and Leitmotif. Pariah, I'm going to have to get used to a bit more. So we'll see where we end up. I'll probably do a ranking someday of Dredg albums. Yeah, I really like this. And it was released a long time ago. I think it's got a lot of meaning to it that maybe people have missed. If you don't like it, despite all I've said here, that's life. It's subjective. I like that you've got that opinion because it's different from mine, and thinking different things is good. So I like that you think different from me. But I'm also overjoyed if you think the same thing as me. Let me know what you think. Do you think there are meanings I'm missing? Maybe I'm looking too deep into this, which is probably true. Yeah, what do you think? Have you changed your mind on this album? Because most comments are from like 10, 11 years ago. Are you watching this thinking, yeah, my opinion's changed over the years? Or are you going to come back to it after a long time and say, maybe I misjudged it? Let me know what you think. This has been Dredg's, Chuckles and Mr Squeezy. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Bit on the long side, but I thought the album deserved it, honestly. So, I like you. You're not as bad as they say. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Ta-ra.